police officer stops Dena Norris on a quiet street, completely unaware of who her father is, but the second Chuck Norris shows up, everything changes. Instantly. Subscribe to the channel and drop a comment letting us know where you're watching from. It had been one of those school days, the kind that leaves you drained before you even make it to the front door. Dena Norris stepped out of the tall gray building, adjusted the strap of her backpack, and exhaled. It wasn't just the weight of the textbooks digging into her shoulders, it was the mental fog from a day full of tests, lectures, and conversations she had no energy for. All she wanted was a hot cup of tea and the silence of her room. The sun was already on its way down, splashing the sky with streaks of orange and purple. The air was cool, still carrying the soft scent of rain from earlier. As she made her way down a familiar side street, one that cut her travel time in half, her sneakers occasionally splashed through shallow puddles reflecting neon shop lights. It was quiet. A few people passed by, some heading to the subway, others lost in their own worlds. This route had always felt safe. Predictable. The small businesses were closing up for the night, metal shutters rattling down, while a distant siren hummed like a fading echo. She turned up the volume in her headphones, letting the beat drown out the city's buzz. For the first time today, she felt almost relaxed. Maybe this weekend she'd sleep in. Watch that movie her friend recommended. Do absolutely nothing. But then, the sound of a revving engine snapped her out of that calm. She frowned but didn't turn around. Probably just a car passing by. It didn't pass. The engine slowed. Then, tires screeched. A car jerked to a stop directly in front of her, headlights flooding the sidewalk. Before she could react, the door swung open. A man stepped out that was tall, in a sharp police uniform. He didn't move quickly. No sense of urgency. Every step was heavy, controlled, almost theatrical. His boots echoed as he approached, hand adjusting the belt on his waist, gun on one side, handcuffs glinting under the streetlight. Dena froze. She took a step back on instinct. He didn't say a word. Just stood there, watching her with a cold stare that sent a chill up her spine. His face, half-shadowed, gave nothing away except the glint in his eye, something cruel, something arrogant. She hadn't done anything. There was no reason for this. But he was blocking her path now. Fully. Her heart started pounding. This wasn't a normal stop. This wasn't a random question. He kept staring. Not like a cop assessing a situation. More like someone studying prey. There was something off, something she couldn't name but could feel. Still, she didn't run. She wouldn't. She hadn't done anything wrong. But then, he shifted just enough for his gun to catch the light. Her breath hitched. Without a word, he stepped in closer. She backed up again, barely noticeable. But he noticed. He smirked. Slow. Calculated. Like he was waiting for this moment. And finally, he spoke. His voice was steady, but the authority in his tone wasn't casual, it was threatening. He demanded to see her ID. Like she was already guilty of something. But what he didn't know was who her father was. And he was about to find out. Dena hesitated. She knew her rights. She wasn't doing anything suspicious. She hadn't broken any laws. But she also knew something else. Standing up to the wrong cop could flip everything sideways in a second. Swallowing hard, she reached for her backpack. Her hands looked steady, but inside, she was unraveling. Her breath quickened just enough to give her away. The slight tremble in her fingers as she unzipped the front pocket. Her school ID was there, basic, harmless. She pulled it out and offered it to him. He didn't take it. He just stared. First at the card. Then at her. Seconds stretched. Then, with a sudden flick, he snatched it from her hand, not urgent, not forceful, disrespectful. Dena flinched, but said nothing. He held the ID like it was something dirty, turning it over slowly, pretending to inspect it. Then he laughed. Low. Mocking. Cold. The kind of laugh that crawled under your skin. His eyes met hers again, and she didn't need a single word to understand what he was thinking. He had already made up his mind about her. And it wasn't good. She wanted to reach out, grab her ID back, end this nonsense, but she held back. She knew better. Then, just like that, he dropped it. No. He flicked it to the ground. The sound of plastic tapping against the pavement hit harder than it should have. Dena stared at it, fists curling at her sides. This wasn't a check. This wasn't procedure. This was a game, and he wanted her to play. She didn't move at first. Neither did he. Then, slowly, she crouched down to pick it up. But before her fingers reached it, his boot slammed down on top of the card. She froze. Her breath caught in her throat. Her muscles locked. She stared at the polished black boot pressing down on her ID like it was a bug on the street. This wasn't about law. This was about power. And she was the target. Dena forced herself to look up. His smirk had grown. He wanted her to break. To lose control. To give him an excuse. She didn't. She rose slowly. Steady. Controlled. And for a moment, just a flicker, his expression faltered. He didn't expect restraint. He wanted rage. And she wasn't giving it. But he wasn't done. He stepped closer. Too close. Close enough she could smell the sharp scent of his aftershave mixing with leather and sweat. Close enough her skin began to crawl. Then, without looking away, he lifted his boot and nudged the ID. It slid across the pavement, landing a few feet behind her. She didn't move. But something changed in her eyes. A heat. A fire. Her nails dug into her palms. But before she could take a step, his hand was suddenly on her shoulder. Not rough. Not gentle. Firm. Measured. A silent reminder of who he thought was in control. Her instinct screamed, move. Get away. Push back. But she knew one wrong move, and it would all spiral. The grip tightened. Still no words. But he didn't need them. The silence said it all. She wasn't in charge. He was. And he was enjoying every second of it. Her jaw clenched. Her mind raced. No one was around. No witnesses. Just her, him, and the city pretending not to notice. Then, his fingers shifted. And before she could even register it, he yanked her backward. Her body jerked. She stumbled. Her shoes scraped against the pavement as she tried to steady herself. But before she could stand tall again, he shoved her. Hard. Harder this time. The shove slammed Dena into the brick wall behind her. Pain exploded through her shoulder and tore down her spine. A sharp gasp escaped her lips as she instinctively pushed away from the rough surface, but she barely had a second to recover. His hand was on her again. This time, he grabbed her wrist, twisted her arm behind her back in one swift, practiced motion. Pain flared bright and immediate. She gritted her teeth, refusing to scream. She knew what this was. This wasn't an arrest. This was a performance. A threat. A warning. He wanted her to resist. He was waiting for it. Because the moment she did, it would justify everything he had already decided to do. But she wouldn't give him that. And her silence? It only made him more cruel. He wrenched her arm higher. The pressure in her shoulder crossed into agony. Her knees buckled, just slightly, but she forced herself to stay standing. Then came the next blow. Her feet left the ground. And she hit the pavement. Hard. A burning sting shot through her legs as her knees scraped raw against the asphalt. Her hands broke her fall, but the shock sent pain crashing up her arms. For a heartbeat, everything froze. Dena sucked in air, shaky, shallow. The taste of metal on her tongue. Her limbs were screaming, her skin torn. But the worst pain wasn't physical. It was the realization. She was completely alone. She could hear his boots behind her. Slow. Casual. Like a lion circling the wounded. Then, pressure. A boot against her back. She froze. He wasn't trying to hurt her with it. He didn't need to. It was enough to pin her down. Enough to say, "You're not going anywhere." The weight lifted. And then fingers gripped her jacket, rough, impatient. She was hauled back to her feet, her body yanked like it weighed nothing. Her vision swam. She barely had a moment to breathe before another shove sent her stumbling again. Then, his hand clamped around the back of her neck. Her breath caught. This wasn't just intimidation anymore. This was personal. She squeezed her eyes shut. Think. Think. The street was still empty. No witnesses. No help. No cameras. And no consequences for him. Another violent tug pulled her back into the moment. He was dragging her now toward the patrol car. Toward isolation. Toward silence. No. Panic surged. She planted her feet. His grip tightened. He yanked harder. Pain shot through her wrist, but she didn't budge. She wouldn't go. She couldn't go. Somewhere deep down, she knew, if she got in that car, she wasn't coming back out. With one last burst of strength, she twisted, her arms slipped free. She staggered back, breath ragged, chest heaving. His face changed. The smirk vanished. And then the fury came. His muscles tensed. His eyes darkened. And she knew she'd made a mistake. He lunged. No restraint this time. No pretense. He gripped her arms with bruising force. She barely had time to resist before he spun her around and slammed her forward. Her stomach hit the patrol car's hood with a force that knocked the wind out of her. The cold metal bit into her skin. She pushed against it, his hand crushed down between her shoulder blades. She couldn't move. Her pulse thundered in her ears. Her thoughts raced. Think, Dena. Think. Then, her phone. Still in her pocket. Fingers twitching, she shifted her weight. Slowly. Carefully. Her hand slid toward her side. Her fingertips brushed the smooth edge of the screen. Almost there. And then, the pressure on her back disappeared. She gasped. A flash of hope. Maybe he was done. But then, he grabbed her shoulders, spun her around, and shoved. The pavement slammed into her back like concrete thunder. The breath tore from her lungs. Her vision blurred. And above her, he stood. No more games. No more masks. This was rage now. This was control, unchecked. For the first time that night, real fear took hold. She was at his mercy, and he had none. Her fingers twitched. Her hand closed around the phone. She gripped it like a lifeline. Pain screamed through every inch of her body. But with the last thread of strength, she pressed the call button. The screen lit up. A name appeared. The name. Her voice trembled, broken and weak. But she managed one word. And someone answered. The ground beneath her was cold. Solid. But everything else in Dena's world was spiraling into chaos. Her breath came in shallow bursts, her body aching from the brutal assault. Pain throbbed through her limbs, her ribs pressed harshly under the officer's boot. And still, her hand clutched the phone, its screen casting a faint glow against her trembling fingers. The call had gone through. She had spoken. Now, silence. Above her, the officer hadn't noticed. His eyes gleamed with sick pride, still savoring the power he thought he held. He believed this was over, that he had won. He was wrong. The shift came suddenly, not loud, not obvious, but undeniable. The air changed. Dena felt it before she saw anything. The weight pressing down on her didn't seem so permanent anymore. The presence of the officer, once absolute, was being challenged by something stronger. Then, footsteps. Not hurried. Not panicked. Just steady. Deliberate. Heavy boots against concrete. Measured. Calm. Certain. The officer stiffened. Just slightly. His head turned toward the sound. Instinct tried to warn him, buried deep under all that arrogance, but he didn't listen. He dismissed it. But Dena didn't. She knew. She turned her head, vision still blurry with pain, but her heart started to pound for a different reason now. Because from the edge of the shadows, beyond the broken halo of streetlights, a figure stepped into view. Tall. Steady. Unshakable. And just like that, the entire street paused. The officer's smirk twitched. His stance shifted. And he turned to face the newcomer, puffing out his chest like this was just another obstacle he could push through. But the man walking toward him wasn't just anyone. It was Chuck Norris. And in that moment, everything changed. Even through the pain, even with bruises blooming and blood on her knees, Dena felt something break loose inside her, something heavy. Relief. Real, soul-deep relief. Chuck's face gave nothing away. His eyes, sharp and cold, scanned the scene with surgical precision. He saw the blood, the dirt, the bruises, and he saw Dena. His jaw locked. His fists curled, calm but coiled. The officer didn't recognize him at first, or pretended not to. That was his first mistake. Chuck stopped just a few feet away. Hands at his sides. Silent. Still. Unmovable. The air between them crackled. A standoff. Unspoken, but undeniable. The officer broke it with a barked command, trying to reassert dominance. But Chuck didn't flinch. Didn't answer. Didn't need to. His presence alone was louder than anything that man could have said. And then, Chuck stepped forward. Just one step. And the officer, without thinking, stepped back. It was instinct. Something primal. His brain hadn't caught up yet. But his body knew, this is not a man you want to challenge. Dena saw it. She saw the flicker of fear creep into the officer's eyes. Chuck's voice finally cut through the silence. Low. Controlled. Quiet. But behind that quiet was a force so dangerous, so absolute, it made the night itself hold its breath. The officer's hand twitched. He wasn't done. Pride had its claws in him too deep. He reached for his baton, fingers curling around the handle, trying to reassert his place in the food chain. That was his second mistake. Because Chuck Norris was faster. In a blur, the baton was ripped from the officer's grip, twisted away with a sharp motion that made him cry out in pain. The weapon clattered to the ground, useless. Chuck moved effortlessly, disarming him like it was second nature, because for him, it was. The officer dropped to one knee, gasping. His confidence shattered. But Chuck wasn't finished. Still trying to recover, the officer reached for his last defense, his gun. His third, and final, mistake. Chuck moved before the gun even cleared the holster. One move. One impossibly fast strike. The officer hit the ground, flat on his back, gasping for breath, staring at the sky in disbelief. Disarmed. Defeated. Done. The weapon now rested in Chuck's hand. He glanced at it, then calmly ejected the magazine. It dropped with a metallic clatter. A second later, the gun followed, sliding across the pavement, harmless now. The officer sat up, coughing, broken in body and ego. Chuck stood over him, silent, still, like a storm that had just passed through. And for the first time that night, Dena heard it. Fear. Real fear. In his voice. The officer stammered, some half-formed excuse, a desperate attempt to justify what he'd done. But Chuck didn't react. He didn't even look at him. His eyes shifted toward Dena. And in that moment, when their eyes met, the chaos around her fell away. She felt something she hadn't felt in what seemed like forever, safe. Chuck crouched beside her, every movement deliberate and calm. His hands, which had just disarmed a trained officer in seconds, now moved gently, checking her injuries without a word. She winced when he touched her scraped knee, but she didn't pull away. His presence was steady. Grounding. He wasn't just there to protect her, he was protection. Satisfied that she was conscious, that she could still breathe and speak, he stood. That's when the sirens hit. Sharp. Loud. Growing closer. Red and blue lights lit up the street as squad cars skidded to a stop. Doors flew open. Officers jumped out with weapons drawn, ready to take control. But they stopped. Because what they saw made them freeze. A battered girl on the ground. Their fellow officer disarmed, bleeding, humiliated. And standing calmly at the center of it all, Chuck Norris. An immovable force. For a heartbeat, the entire street held its breath. Then one of the commanding officers barked, "Drop your weapon." Chuck didn't flinch. He just nodded toward the pistol lying harmlessly on the pavement. No threat. No drama. Just control. The officer nearest the fallen man scanned the scene, piecing it together fast. His face darkened as he looked at Dena, the bruises, the torn clothes, the blood. His jaw clenched. Without hesitation, he turned to the downed officer and said 4 words. "Arrest him. Now." The disgraced man's head snapped up. Wait. This isn't." No one listened. The cuffs that had been meant for Dena now clicked shut around his wrists. Justice. Real, unfiltered justice. Dena let out a shaky breath. She didn't even realize she'd been holding it. Chuck turned to her again. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. She knew. She was safe. Because Chuck Norris had answered the call. The lights from the patrol cars pulsed over the street, casting surreal shadows. The sirens were still wailing, but to Dena, they felt distant. Her whole body ached, skin scraped, limbs bruised, but none of that mattered anymore. She wasn't alone. Chuck stood next to her now, a living wall between her and the man who tried to destroy her. And that man? He was done. The officer who'd once carried himself like a god now sat hunched, cradling his injured wrist. His badge, once gleaming on his chest, looked like it didn't belong anymore, like a costume he no longer deserved. The arrogance? Gone. The power? Shattered. He had made too many mistakes. And now, he was paying for every one. The other officers hesitated, hands still hovering over their weapons, unsure how to react to the sight in front of them. They expected a suspect in cuffs, not a fallen peer stripped of everything. The captain stepped forward. A man whose eyes carried years of hard-won experience. He looked at Dena. He saw her torn sleeves, her scraped palms, the dirt on her face, and his expression darkened. Then he turned to Chuck. No words were exchanged. He knew who stood before him. And Chuck didn't move. He didn't need to. The corrupt officer, now fully aware of just how far he'd fallen, looked around, frantic. His eyes darted from one face to the next, desperate for an ally. But none came. Not one of them stood with him now. He took a step back. Then another. The panic was visible. "Take his badge," the captain ordered. Calm. Clear. Final. And that one line hit harder than any punch. The disgraced officer staggered, breath catching. His identity, his authority, was being erased in front of everyone. One of the younger cops stepped forward, hesitating only for a moment before reaching for the badge pinned to his chest. For a second, it looked like the man might fight back, his jaw tightened, fists clenched. But then he looked at Chuck, and everything inside him crumbled. He let them take it. His shoulders sagged. The mask had cracked. The weight of what he'd done finally crashing down on him. But it wasn't over. "Your weapon," the captain said next. The disgraced officer hesitated again. But slowly, with trembling hands, he undid the strap on his holster and handed over the gun. No ceremony. No dignity. Just the final act of surrender. The cuffs clicked. Sharp. Metallic. Final. The man who had once laughed while shoving Dena to the ground now stood bound and broken, powerless in the face of everything he had once abused. And his eyes. They turned one last time to Chuck Norris. But there was no plea in them now. Just fear. The officer's voice cracked with desperate pleading, but Chuck didn't flinch. There was no pity in his eyes. No sympathy. Just silence. Cold, unwavering judgment. He stepped forward. The officer instinctively recoiled, flinching like a man expecting pain. But Chuck didn't raise a hand. He didn't have to. "You made a choice," Chuck said, his voice low and steady, like thunder rumbling just beneath the surface. The officer's breath caught. "You chose to abuse your power." Each word landed like a hammer. "You thought no one would stop you." Chuck's eyes narrowed. "But you were wrong." The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was heavy. Unforgiving. The officer's head dropped. He couldn't meet Chuck's stare anymore. Two officers grabbed him by the arms. He didn't fight. He knew it was over. The door of the patrol car slammed shut behind him, sealing the moment. Dena let out a shaky breath she hadn't realized she was holding. It was done. He was done. For the first time since the nightmare had begun, the weight began to lift from her chest. She turned toward Chuck. He was still watching the car as it pulled away, fists clenched, eyes locked. His stance remained firm, his focus razor-sharp, making absolutely sure that justice had been carried out. Only when the car disappeared did he let go of the tension in his shoulders. He looked at her. Their eyes met. And for the first time that night, she felt safe. Chuck stepped toward her. His voice was low, quiet. "Are you hurt?" She nodded slightly. "A little." That was an understatement. But Chuck saw through it. He didn't push. He simply placed a hand on her shoulder, not with force, not to control, but to reassure. To steady. And Dena let her eyes close for just a second, letting it sink in. She was safe. She was alive. And thanks to Chuck Norris, she had won. But one thing still remained. Go home. So they did. Together, they turned away from the flashing lights, from the echoes of sirens, from the wreckage of everything that had just happened. Justice had been served. Now, it was time to heal. The sirens faded, swallowed by the hum of the city. The red and blue lights were gone. The night grew still again. But it was not the same night Dena had begun walking home in. The world had shifted. Her legs ached. The adrenaline had burned out, replaced by the slow creep of pain, sharp, pulsing. But worse than the bruises was the emotional weight pressing down on her. And yet, she was still standing. Because Chuck Norris stood beside her. Even with the danger gone, he remained alert, watching, scanning the street. Relaxed. But ready. Dena glanced at him. She saw strength. Calm. Focus. He had done what no one else could. Stepped in when no one else had. Stopped a nightmare that could have gone so much further. And saved her. They walked in silence. But not an awkward one. A quiet forged in fire. A silence that said, "You made it." Chuck kept her on the inside of the sidewalk, always between her and the world. Still shielding. Still protecting. The city was hushed now. Storefronts dark. Cars few. But the night had changed. Dena looked at her hands. Raw. Trembling. The fear still flickered beneath her skin. But something else was rising to meet it, strength. Because she hadn't been alone. Not for long. Chuck must have seen her shoulders tense, because his voice finally broke the silence. "You're safe now." Simple words. But they landed with the force of everything that had come before. She nodded. No words yet. But she believed him. When they reached her house, her knees nearly buckled at the sight of the porch light, the faint glow of the TV through the window. The world she thought she might not return to, it was still here. Waiting for her. Chuck stood beside her as she reached for the door. She froze. Just for a moment. Even here, at home, the echoes of what had happened lingered. Chuck noticed. He placed a steady hand on her shoulder. "Go inside. Get cleaned up. I'll be right here." She swallowed hard. Then nodded. Inside, the warmth hit her instantly. The scent of home wrapped around her like a blanket, soft, safe, familiar. She made it to the hallway mirror. And froze. The girl staring back at her didn't look like the Dena who had left school hours ago. Hair messy. Clothes torn. Dirt and blood streaked across her skin. Bruises already forming. Eyes wide with everything she'd been through. She barely recognized herself. But she was still standing. She cleaned up in silence. Washed away the blood. Changed into soft, clean clothes. Let the routine pull her back into herself. When she returned to the living room, Chuck was still there. At the kitchen table. Watchful. Still. She sat across from him. There was a long, comfortable pause. Then, finally, Dena exhaled. "Thank you." Chuck met her gaze. He didn't nod. Didn't offer cliches. He just held her stare. Steady. Unshakable. Because some things don't need to be said. After a moment, he leaned back. "You should rest." She nodded. She was so tired. As she stood, so did he. He walked to the door. Paused. Looked back at her. "If you need anything," he said, "you call me." Her voice was stronger now. "I will." Chuck gave her one last look. Then stepped outside. The door clicked shut. She stood there, staring at it. She knew sleep wouldn't come easy tonight. The memories would linger. The fear would return. But now, there was something stronger than fear. Because she wasn't alone. And as long as Chuck Norris was out there, she never would be. Subscribe to the channel to stay updated with more stories. Watch the next video or explore others on the channel. And share this one with someone who needs to remember what real courage looks like.